And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story because your story matters. Good evening. Welcome to The Money Show. If you think Donald Trump and geopolitics isn't going to affect you, well, I imagine that one simple tweet or post on Truth Social from the US President-elect might well have changed your mind over the weekend, essentially saying that if the BRICS countries, which include us, were to no longer use the dollar as a reserve currency, were to try and create our own currency in some way, shape or form, the result would be 100% tariffs imposed on our goods entering the US market, effectively locking us out of the US market. And it goes to the heart of the way that Trump does his politics. And on one level, I don't think anyone really seriously thinks the the BRICS countries are about to come up with a reserve currency. The idea has been discussed, but it's got no further than that. It's very difficult to do. And there's a reason why the US dollar has been the reserve currency for so long, at least 1944, depending on where you want to see it. But the point is that it does show you about pressure. It's really a game of pressure. And Trump is basically warning countries he doesn't like, groups of countries he doesn't like, that he sees as a threat, that he will punish you. That's what he's doing. And unfortunately, it's quite effective in some ways. Our government saying today, Ronald Lamola's spokesperson, Crispin Piri, I think it was, he's speaking for the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. There are no plans among the BRICS countries to create their own reserve currency. I mean, this was always the case. The issue comes up whenever there's a BRICS summit. No progress seems to be made on it. We'll talk about that and Trump and tariffs and the US dollar in just a moment. Fascinating to look at some of the money and some of the numbers coming out of Black Friday. So Capitec put out some numbers this afternoon about spending on Black Friday, and they did, which I think was probably the correct thing. They looked at spending over Friday and Saturday. And I remember when I started my working life in essentially a shopping mall selling things, or selling hi-fis, if you must know, because I know you'll ask, and that's fine. But I always remember the mall saying at the time, the two biggest shopping days of the year would be Christmas Eve, if it didn't fall on a Sunday, it didn't open on a Sunday then, or the Saturday before Christmas. Sometimes the Christmas Eve and the Saturday fell on the same day, of course, depending on the year. I wonder if it's changed and if Black Friday has moved everything a bit earlier, or if actually we're spending a lot more. Capitec saying the amount of money that was spent by their customers over that 2-day period, Black Friday and Saturday over the weekend, was up 27% year on year. That's a huge amount of money. Card payments were up 21%. Take-A-Lot, we'll talk about Take-A-Lot in a moment about that, but Take-A-Lot Take-A-Lot were the biggest online retailer in South Africa, but Shein, they were the biggest fashion retailer in South Africa. I thought that was important too, because that also then tells you essentially where people are spending the money and how they're spending the money. So, of course, all of that to come as well. And I just find those numbers really very interesting. Talking of Take-A-Lot, and we'll talk about this in a moment with Naspers, their results out today. Very strong results, let's be clear. But Take-A-Lot's still making a loss. And you have to think to yourself, if you are the most entrenched, the biggest kind of online retailer in the country that's owned by South Africans, and you're still making a loss, and now you're about to face more competition, well, surely that's just going to get tougher and tougher for you. Isn't that really what's going to happen? Good to have you along with us. You know the number, of course. Where did you buy what you bought over the weekend? I'd like to hear from you. Was it Take-A-Lot? Was it Chin, Temu? Was it somewhere else? Was it actually a physical retail store? 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and 072 702 1702.
702.
702.
Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, Naspers reporting today it experienced top-line growth of 76% in the first 6 months of its financial year. Earnings in Process, the listed consumer group of Naspers, rose dramatically. A large part of that, it seems, was from the company iFood, the company that they own in Brazil. Also, a strong result from Tencent boosting Naspers, resulting in core headline earnings of $3.5 billion. But for Naspers, it's about still making an e-commerce loss in South Africa of $19 million, and that, to an extent, is about the Take-A-Lot group. Irvin, too, is the Group President and Chief Investment Officer at Naspers and Prosus. Irvin, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. You're present in many markets around the world now. You're driving e-commerce in those markets. from what I can see, you're making strong progress. You must be very pleased with these results. Your earnings are up strongly.
Thanks for those remarks, and we are excited to be where we are in the journey of changing our portfolio from a significantly loss-making one into a profitable one. We showed the world that we were profitable for our e-commerce businesses for full year FY24, fiscal 24. Our fiscal year ends in the March. And this first half of FY25, I think we've shown that the progress continues. So we are pleased, but we're not satisfied, Stephen. So I want to acknowledge the progress, but we're also not satisfied. There's much more to do.
What is the most important thing that you need to do next? Obviously, you need to continue to drive profitability in these markets, but is there one specific thing that you need to sort out?
You said it well. I think we need to continue the momentum. We need to continue the trajectory that we've been on. The performance that we've seen in our portfolio has actually been quite widespread across the portfolio, not one or two or three businesses. And that's both in terms of driving further growth. You may have seen that our growth rate for the consolidated set of businesses on the whole outpaced the growth of peers by over 2x. And we need to continue that type of outperformance. And then profitability is something we've shown, but we need to drive further margin enhancements throughout the portfolio.
Some of your major markets are China, Brazil, India, South Africa. I mean, everyone's moving online. Are you finding big differences in how each of these markets is doing that? Or are you finding very similar sort of resonances with what's happening to your e-commerce businesses in those different markets? I mean, are they all having very different experiences?
I'd say if you take the long view, that there is quite a bit of commonality in how consumers interact with online properties, whether that's to access content or whether that's to access and purchase goods and services. There are some regional differences. For example, in Asia, Asia is a big place, including many countries, but China in particular, Southeast Asia, you tend to see more of the quote-unquote super app phenomenon, where one app is the centerpiece of the online or digital consumer's livelihood. So you see that with, of course, our Tencent set of businesses around the WeChat ecosystem. You see that in Korea. You see that in Southeast Asia. And elsewhere, we don't tend to see the super app as much, but we certainly try to learn from what those ecosystems have been able to achieve.
For us in South Africa, your big e-commerce name is Takealot, and it's entrenched. It's been going for a long time. It's established, and yet it's still making a loss.
Yes, you noted that in, I think, your introduction to this segment, and we certainly noticed that. We certainly think we need to do more to change the profile of the business to a profitable one. We are investing behind the business, and competition is increasing. You also noted that in your introductory remarks. We know that, so some of the loss you're observing is an investment on our behalf to try to protect what we have and also to enhance our competitive position. We understand competition is coming. It's already in the country, and we're very mindful of that.
I mean, if you weren't profitable before, now in the last year, really, Amazon has come to South Africa. I mean, people bought from Amazon before, but Amazon.co.za went online. Temu and Shein are only growing stronger. I mean, this is going to be very, very tough for you now.
You're right. The nature of competition has changed some with the entry of foreign competition. You've named three of them. And also domestic competition is also increasing. I think you can anticipate what we've seen, of course, the Checker 6060 with some announcement of moving in the direction of general merchandise that will also increase competition. And every competitor is one that we respect and consider carefully. And what we can do is build upon our foundation of very strong relationship with the consumer, very strong logistics network. And we can also do more with offerings like our subscription program, Take a Lot More, which drives both increased customer loyalty and also better value for the customer. So we have some measures that we're undertaking to try to maintain our leadership position in the market, but we acknowledge the entry of new competitors and also existing ones in the domestic arena.
Irvin, too. Thank you very much indeed. Group President and Chief Investment Officer of Naspers and Process. Really appreciate your time tonight on The Money Show.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Well, interesting and I think important reactions over the last 24 hours to the threat by the US President-elect Donald Trump over the weekend that if BRICS countries do try and move away from the US dollar as a trading currency or reserve currency, we would face tariffs of 100%, would have to say goodbye to selling into the US economy. Our government said this morning BRICS countries are not looking at creating a new reserve currency. The Kremlin said if the US did try to compel countries to continue to use the dollar, that would backfire and more people would move away from it. Professor Adrian Saville is Professor of Economics and Finance at GIBS. Adrian, good evening to you and thanks for your time. I mean, I presume if the BRICS countries did something the US didn't like, Trump would have the power to impose tariffs, and that would have a huge impact on the BRICS economies in some way, shape or form.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have to distance ourselves a little from, the saber rattling and, try and get on to, some vantage point that gives us a bit of perspective on this. This is very bold, strident language. It's very Trumpish. I'd expect nothing less. But much like, as we go into 2025, we should probably anticipate the policies that he imposes are, some fraction, a moderated version of what he's proposed on his campaigning. I would say the same about the threat of tariffs being imposed. What I'm a little bit bemused by this because, in part, what it displays, if anything, is an assumption or a mindset that somehow you can push one part of the economic canvas and there will be no knock-on or spillover on another part, because the most obvious way in which imposing tariffs on those who don't want to participate, there's another mechanism, and it's called exchange rate adjustment.
I mean, it's fascinating because, in a way, it just means that that Trump will not be able to predict what happens. He might say he wants to do all of these things, but he himself won't know what's going to happen. You can't make any promises here.
Absolutely. As bold and strident as he is, if he has somehow, been able to figure out exactly how to control arguably, the world's most powerful suite of markets, which are currency markets, then this is just on a completely different level. We've never seen this type of power before. I would agree with you in that one breath. And then in a second sort of adjacent point is he's back in the business of we'll build walls, we'll lock people out, and by doing that, we'll become even more powerful. Stephen, I know that you're familiar with the work that we've done on that six-factor modeling, and there is no country that has become successful by building walls and locking others out. Now, I'm not saying just pulling the walls down and opening up is the solution, but if you want to achieve sustained, inclusive, you need partners. And this is not the language of partnership, collaboration, cohesion. This is warring language, fighting language.
Isn't it all a bit, as you say, saber rattling? It's all a game of pressure. Because even if the BRICS countries wanted to move away from the dollar as a reserve currency or to trade in other currencies, it would be difficult and expensive to do. There's a reason why the dollar has been the world's reserve currency for such a long time.
Stephen, this is such a long way off. As things stand, the nearest challenger is the renminbi, which makes up about 4.5% of cross-border activity. So it is so distant, from this being a serious challenge. And if it were to become a serious challenge, I can't for one moment envisage this happening under Trump's administration, although if this were ever to come to pass, I'm sure he would claim the victory.
I'm sure he would. It also just shows you what people have to prepare for. You're going to, it's going to be government by Twitter or government by X, or actually he uses Truth Social. So, I mean, this is how it's going to be. And then you've got to try and work out what he really means and whether he's telling the truth or not.
Yeah, there's, so the one thing that, I have to sort of think harder about or think again on is, at the beginning of this year, we came into the busiest year for democracy that history has ever known. And we've seen dramatic change around the world. We start the year with Biden, we finish with Trump, we start the year with a conservative government, we finish with Labour, India must form a minority government, France can't form a government, etc., etc. So we've had this dramatic change in governments around the world. And although having the change now behind us, knowing what we're dealing with, reduces uncertainty, and you and I spoke about this a few weeks ago, and that, I think injects confidence that we actually now know what we're dealing with. Sort of better the devil you know, but boy, there's a whole lot here that is unknowable when it comes to the policy ideas and declarations. Absolutely unknowable and very erratic.
Professor Adrian Saville, thank you very much indeed. Professor of Economics and Finance at GIBS. Well, meanwhile, while the Trump team prepares to take over at the White House next year, both he and his incoming Vice President, J.D. Vance, have said they want to do two things. They want to weaken the dollar and raise tariffs. That would make the U.S. economy more competitive. Iain Cunningham is head of multi-asset growth at 91. Iain, good evening. So I understand the desire to have tariffs, to impose them, and to have a weaker dollar. But in the past, when the US imposed tariffs during Trump's first term, the dollar got stronger. And when he threatened tariffs now, the dollar got stronger again. Can you really impose tariffs and have a weaker dollar?
Hi there. Good evening. Ultimately, we think there are ways to achieve this. But it's going to take, there's a lot of moving parts to do so. And I think it depends sort of what they're ultimately trying to achieve. And I think the dynamics that have been set out in terms of saying, they want to use tariffs to effectively create more of a fair trade system, and they're going to continue to ratchet them up, most likely, until they've obtained some level of concessions from various trade partners. And one of those concessions could well turn out to be some sort of agreement where they actually do some sort of coordinated weakening of the US dollar. So I guess in short, we do think it is possible to achieve both those objectives.
Possible doesn't mean easy, though. As you say, it's not just a lot of moving parts, it's a very large number of moving parts.
Yes, no, exactly. And I think obviously some of the key challenges there, and I think that there's obviously a wide spectrum of potential outcomes that could occur as we move forward. But one of the alternate paths is obviously they could continue to ratchet up tariffs and not actually achieve any negotiations and enter sort of the tit-for-tat world. That would be a pretty difficult environment and would probably result in material dollar strength. Obviously, the most bullish scenario for the global economy is actually they begin to ratchet up tariffs. They achieve some of the concessions they require, and major authorities in the likes of Japan, China and possibly the Eurozone do some level of coordinated intervention to weaken the US dollar, and then we get more positive reflection through sort of global trade, manufacturing cycles and the like. So, as we say, wide spectrum of outcomes with lots of moving parts, but it's going to be interesting to see where we go.
Obviously, a great strength for the US is the dollar status as a reserve currency. How important is that? It gives them a huge power they wouldn't otherwise have, and no one can match.
Exactly. So the reserve currency status for the US, I think, is very important. We're seeing Trump and we're seeing the prospective Treasury Secretary say that there is no question to the dollar's reserve status. They seek to maintain that through time, and ultimately there's a number of benefits. One of those benefits is obviously that the US is able to borrow at a cheaper cost than they otherwise would do, given the demand for dollars around the world, known as the exorbitant privilege. So as they're doing these sorts of things and trying to restructure some of the economic architecture globally, there's things they need to sort of manage very carefully to ensure that the reserve status is maintained.
Iain Cunningham, thank you very much indeed. Head of multi-asset growth at 91.
The Money Show.
The markets.
Sia Mbata is a portfolio manager at the Old Mutual Investment Group. Sia, good evening to you. Update from Standard Bank today. They've been hit by devaluations in other countries on our continent, and the market didn't like it at all.
Good evening, Stephen. Yes, so Standard Bank reported their 10-month trading update to December 2024. And I guess the general consensus was that the 2023 earnings base was quite high for a number of reasons, because the Africa business shot the lights out. And so what we've seen is that we've seen a bit of pressure, particularly in the first half. We saw the trading income come in a bit low, and the expectation was that the second half would match that. But I guess the extent of the currency devaluations relative to the ZAR was quite was above expectations, effectively.
And then Nampak, I mean, they seem to be making good progress on the turnaround. They have had a rough time.
That's true. I mean, if you look at the share price, they've done phenomenally well. I mean, the year to date, the share price is more than 100%. And I guess that's testament to the success of the turnaround strategy to date. They've been successful in really hitting those goals. So a number of things. They were able to refinance their business. They've been able to do away or get rid of non-core assets. Specifically, they got rid of a plastic segment, which manufactured drums and crates. There was also a plastic segment in South Africa, as well as in Malawi and Zambia, that they were able to dispose of. And as a result, this helped them free up a bit of capital to allow them to de-gear. So Nampak has historically had an issue with debt. And so with these asset disposals, it's given them a bit of breathing room. And you could see it in the free cash flow generation as well. You know, they've managed their working capital quite well. They've been very conservative on capex expenditure, and you've seen the improvement in free cash flow generation. So, I mean, despite this, I think the market was potentially disappointed, I guess, the extent of the result. But also the board decided not to declare a dividend. I think they're going to be quite conservative going into 2025.
Can't blame them, really. S&P Global Ratings placing Transnet on credit watch. And Transnet, everyone had been sort of saying this turnaround is coming, it's coming very slowly, but it's coming. S&P not convinced.
Most certainly. I think that definitely speaks to the confidence around their ability to execute. And we know how important Transnet is for the country. I mean, ports and rails have far-reaching consequences throughout manufacturing and industrial supply chains, as well as our exports. So it's quite a critical piece, and particularly in South African GDP growth, it's quite a key component. So we've got the Eskom component under control. Transnet needs to come through, and I think this being put on a credit watch really speaks to the confidence in execution. And I think there are gradual improvements, and there are pockets of improvements, but we really need to see overall sustained improvement from the Transnet perspective.
And very quickly, just a word on U.S. markets. I mean, they've got a lot of economic data coming through this week, some company news as well. I mean, another busy week in a in a market that's moving very quickly.
No, certainly. I think going into the holidays, everyone expects things to slow down quite a bit, but we've got quite a few numbers coming out, quite important numbers. We've got manufacturing PMIs coming out. The Fed's meeting this week. I think there will be a number of meetings from that perspective. We've got job opening numbers as well as payroll numbers coming up, as well as the unemployment numbers, which is quite key for the Fed to watch out for. And then on OPEC, oil is quite critical. So they're meeting up this week. And I guess the general expectation with OPEC is that they will continue to pause the production cut unwinds going into the year, just because of the fact that oil has been quite weak or hasn't been as strong as they would have liked it to be. But I guess, we'll see what happens.
Thank you very much indeed, Sia Mbata, portfolio manager at the Old Mutual Investment Group. 30 seconds after 6:30.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes.
By the way, Tumi Morake coming in. She'll be the person talking to you about her journey with money from 7:30 this evening. One of the questions I'm going to ask her is, when did she first realize you could make a living from being funny? Many people have tried to make a living from being funny. Most people, not not doing so well. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Where did you spend money over the Black Friday weekends? So let's just say the Friday, Saturday, the Sunday 2 of the last weekend. Where did you spend it? What did you do? I know some people who drove around. I know some people who did it all on their phones. Some people did it on a slightly bigger screen on a PC. But what did you actually buy and why did you buy it? Big focus on that in the next 20 minutes or so. The consultancy EY reporting what they describe as a surge of investment in Africa last year. It says there's been an increase of 9% in foreign direct investment projects compared to the year before. It also seems that while Egypt has the highest number of foreign money flowing in, we have the highest number of FDI projects. Sandile Hlope is the EY partner and Africa and government and infrastructure industry leader at EY. Sandile, good evening. Thanks for your time. You suggest that you're seeing a surge in foreign direct investment into our continent. Where are people spending the money? It seems renewable power is a big part of this.
Yes, good evening, Stephen, and thank you for having me on your show. Renewable energy is by far the fastest growing destination of foreign direct investment into Africa. That is correct. Really demonstrating Africa's potential in being a major player in renewable energy. If you think about some of our natural resources, such as lots of land, space land, good light, wind, and so forth, it makes it an ideal continent to build renewable projects. I
mean, I presume most of it's solar with some wind?
Yeah, a lot of it is solar. So solar panels are by far the biggest investment, and also led mainly by investment from the likes of the UAE that are really putting more money into their diversification strategy to participate in new energy. So solar is by far the fastest growing renewable energy platform.
Why is Egypt doing so well? I realize it's a big economy, it's a big country, it has a large population. If I recall, it's actually going through quite a big change in its energy market. Is that part of it?
Yeah, so I'll probably say about three things. There's three sectors that Egypt has really focused on reforming and putting, enabling investment ability. So one is definitely in the energy side, but it was really led by their focus on attracting tourism back into Egypt. So a lot of the investment initially went into reconstruction of hotels, transportation, and then obviously as you grow, the tourism sector and supply of energy becomes quite critical. So renewable energy becomes the next big player. So renewable energy infrastructure and hotel and leisure are the big construction projects happening out in Egypt.
What are we seeing happening here? I mean, we seem to have seen quite a big change, and it's largely in the number of projects, not so much the money.
Yeah, so South Africa actually benefited in having the largest number of projects directed this way, and really primarily in about sort of three sectors. So one obviously being renewable, but secondly also in IT and technology. So the whole data center build-up that's happening within our country, and then also closely followed by food and beverage type investment. So again, it looks like South Africa's got quite a good diversified economy in the renewable space, but also looking at focusing at driving more growth into diversified sectors in that sense, such as, the fintech and those other areas.
Is it possible to know at all how that would have been affected by the formation of the coalition government? I mean, it's what everyone talks about, Sandile, but I mean, obviously some of the money would have been earmarked already. Was there an increase or an uptick after the formation of the government, after the election?
So a lot of sort of commitments at this point of stage, but actual flows were more before that time, which had slowed down a bit. But we have seen good increased sentiments towards South Africa, particularly with the country hosting the G20, from this month for the next 12 months. Also big opening up and focusing in that space. The successful turnaround story of Eskom has also helped, because that was sort of disincentivizing investment to a great extent, because if you can't have stable power supply, it's difficult to drive investment. So having solved that problem, we are seeing a renewed interest in South Africa from an investment perspective, particularly in the digital space and AI and technology, because a lot of those data centers do need steady power supply. So having stable energy is critical to drive the whole tech revolution in data centers and so forth.
Are you seeing money flowing from different parts of the world into different parts of the continent? In other words, is, Chinese money or American money coming to Southern Africa and money from the Middle East going to Egypt, for example?
Yeah, so we actually saw quite a resurgence in terms of China's investment, because we focus more on projects-related type capital, not your sort of bilaterals or M&A type investment. And we saw quite a steady increase in terms of projects invested from China, of over 200% in the sort of past year, but also closely followed as usual by, the US being the next player, UAE, UK, and China. So if you take those three countries, UAE, UK and China, they contributed close to half of the investment into the continent. So quite an interesting shift. And as I said, UAE is the renewable play for them. UK, play renewable, but also in the tech space. But China, you're seeing them beginning to also invest in the manufacturing of your solar panels and so forth. And they're offshoring some of that component deployment onto the continent. Hence why you're seeing a bit of a surge in terms of Chinese investment around components, both and inputs into renewable energy.
From what I could see from your report, it seemed that actually we're still not at pre-COVID levels yet. It seems, is it taking a long time to recover FDI into Africa?
Yeah, so in terms of growth since, the pre-2019 level, we're still at a decline in terms of investment in that sense. If you look at the capital invested, has pretty much declined by 16% if you look at the pre-pandemic levels. But we've seen a steady increase of about 9% year on year. But that's slowly coming back, but we still haven't gotten back to the pre-COVID level, 2019 high-level investments of close to over 200-300 billion. So in the current year, we saw 164 billion worth of investments. But in previous years, we were seeing numbers as high as 300-400 billion coming into the continent before 2019.
Sure. It's amazing how long it takes that recovery to happen. Sandile Hlope, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate it. EY partner, Africa Government and Infrastructure Industry Leader at EY.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, a Pan-African bank invested in your story and the potential it can unlock because your story matters. Absa is a registered FSP.
Well, confirmation this afternoon that, I think people's identities are going to matter in this story, that the 6 white men who were executives at Dimension Data, who were found by a judge to have lied about a claimed BE transaction, they're now going to appeal that ruling. One of them is Jeremy Ord. He was the CEO, then chairman of Dimension Data. They were found by the High Court in Joburg to have taken control of the campus in Bryanston, despite telling the parent company, the NTT Group, that they were selling it to a BE consortium. Central to the finding is an email that in which the 6 men actually discussed the deal. Jan Vermeulen is the editor at mybroadband.co.za. Jan, good evening. This group of people say they did nothing wrong, but the ruling against them seems to be pretty damning.
Good evening. Yeah, it is pretty damning, and it's going to be interesting to see what the appeal states. Unfortunately, the statement that they released today explicitly said that they aren't trying to litigate their case in press releases, but they desperately wanted to correct what they call a misconception about the fact that they had somehow exploited the BEE process and tried to this whole concept or this whole accusation of essentially 6 white men abusing the BEE process and kicking out the BEE partners at the end of the day. It's not resulting in an empowerment deal, and they said that's just absolutely not true. And they explained at some length how exactly the deal was structured, and it's actually quite complex. And so it's going to be interesting to see, hopefully, the truth out when the appeal is heard, if the appeal is heard. Maybe the court actually rejects the appeal and says, no, the High Court had it right.
I mean, when people make a deal complex, you have to wonder if it's deliberately complex, because a judge made a ruling, and part of this was an email that seemed to explain exactly what they were doing. It was communication between the 6 of them.
Yes, and so they said in the statement today that, in fact, that email was an entirely separate thing. It had nothing to do with this transaction and had to do with something called Project Thumbs Up, whatever that is. But that apparently had nothing to do with this transaction. And that's part of what the appeal, I suspect, is going to hinge on, is that the judge applied a conversation that was entirely separate from this to this specific transaction.
I mean, I would imagine that a judge would be very aware of the context when it was introduced into evidence. The campus in Bryanston is a massive landmark. A large amount of money is at stake here. I mean, it's a central place.
Indeed. Based on the ruling, it's well north of R1 billion. That's at play here. And it's interesting, if you read between the lines of the statement that was released today by the executives, and you don't have to read that much between the lines, but they apparently advised NTT against selling the campus, and instead to achieve its BEE goals, to instead launch a share scheme. And so you can tell that these executives definitely agree with you, that the campus is a landmark, that it is something that should have remained with Dimension Data, now NTT Data, and should not have been sold at all.
The thing about this case, I mean, if you look at the Black Business Council's reaction, and one cannot blame them for reacting in this way on the facts, on the judgment as things currently stand, they're essentially saying that, as they put it in their statement, these white executives must face the full might of the law. That was from Khanki Matabane, the CEO of the business group. That would suggest actually, this is going to be a symbolic case. As things stand for the moment, it does look like a group of white men lied to try and benefit from BEE in a way that was completely illegal and morally wrong at a time when critics of BEE have been using all sorts of things to attack it. People who support BEE are going to use this as well. This is going to be a highly symbolic case.
Indeed, it's going to be symbolic, and it's going to be a test of South Africa's BEE legislation. As you say, critics have pointed out that BEE has long been exploited in ways that the ruling actually finds, where it certainly does not live up to the name Black Economic Empowerment. It, in fact, the critics would argue it does the exact opposite. And so the case is going to be a test of whether these laws, these Black empowerment laws and the regulations that go with them, actually do what they achieve and actually protect the goals that they set out to achieve, or whether they don't do that at all. And so, if it's found that these executives in fact did nothing wrong, then depending on the context of it all, obviously, once we have the full facts of everything on the table, depending on whether the High Court did something wrong, certainly questions need to be asked about the efficacy of the BEE laws from first principles.
NTT, they're the company that sort of owned it at the time. They had bought Dimension Data back. This is all going back some time, I think, to 2010. Presumably they will really want to get to the bottom of it. It will matter to them. They were the ones who wanted to do this deal for various reasons, and it looks like, according to the current judgment, things changed.
Yes, and they were the ones who acted on a whistleblower report, and in fact filed legal action against the 6 executives to begin with. And so it's certainly something that's highly unusual in corporate South Africa. Usually these kinds of things get swept under the rug, some kind of golden handshake or whatever, and everybody just kind of agrees to keep quiet. And so this is a symbolic case in more than one way.
Thank you very much indeed, Jan Vermeulen. Really appreciate the time. Editor at mybroadband.co.za. A case we watch closely. There is so much going on here, and I made the point, of course, that this is symbolic of many things. You might well have a strong view about it on 011 8830702 or 021 446 0567.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, I wonder where you spent your money over the weekend. And in particular, if you did the festive season shopping earlier, if you did your Christmas shopping a little earlier. And it goes back to the question I was asking a little earlier in the show, whether or not people have moved their festive spending earlier in December simply because of Black Friday, or if the shopping season is longer and you're just spending more. And the obvious response to that is who's got money to spend. Perfectly legitimate response, because I think people are battling at the moment. We'll get to the bottom of it in a little while. There's a lot more information coming out about who spent money where and how and why they spent it. Also a big change in spending patterns, it would seem. But overall, people spending more money on Black Friday than they spent last year, and by quite a way too. We'll speak to Capitec about that. They've been looking at their numbers. Tumi Morake coming through from 7:30 this evening about her money journey. And then also, don't forget, we'll find out more about the book, The Super Cadres. Peter du Toit is, in fact, the author. He's an assistant editor at News 24. I'm sure you've read him, but his book is about our politics and, of course, money and our politics. The reports again in the newspapers over the weekend weekend, yesterday in fact, about deals in the Eastern Cape involving people very connected, it would seem, to the ANC. So there's a lot more to come on this issue. All of that to come on The Money Show this Monday evening. It's just gone 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA Corporate and Investment Banking, a Pan-African bank that's invested in your story, because your story matters. Evening, welcome to the second hour of The Money Show. Tonight we'll find out where you spent your money on that Black Friday, and I suppose through the weekend, really. Also intriguing questions to ask, I think important questions to ask about how much money is being spent and where it's being spent. Try and sort of work out where all the money is going. And a deeper understanding about our politics and the search for accountability when it comes to money. Peter du Toit wrote the book, The Super Cadres. I mean, one of the questions, of course, is around whether any of state capture would have happened without the cadre deployment policy. Still, after all of these years, incredibly controversial, and something that still really raises very high emotion whenever people talk about that issue. That issue does come up, as you can well imagine. Good to hear from you as well tonight. On 011 883 0702 021 446 0567. Voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702. Tumi Morake, she is up from 7:30 this evening about her money story, what it was like for her. We'll ask her also, I mean, at the time that she was starting out, basically trying to be a comedian and doing stand-up comic. There were very few women doing it at the time. I'll ask you what that experience was like as well tonight.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
So it does seem that Black Friday lived up to expectations. I should say, really, the Friday and the Saturday. There are obviously still some big shopping days to come, but Capitec reporting there was a 27% year-on-year increase in spending on Friday and Saturday. So the Black Friday and the Saturday that came after it. Francois Viviers is the Group Executive for Marketing and Communications at Capitec. Francois, good evening to you. 27% is a huge number. Where were people spending their money?
Good evening, Stephen, and good evening, listeners. Yes, it is a huge number, and I think quite interesting, when you talk about 23 million clients, to put that in perspective, that's really a third of South Africa, or more than half of the banked population in the country. So it's quite a big data set, and what we were able to do is to look at where people spend their money over the last couple of years. And of course, the highlights is the last 2 days, over the Friday and the Saturday, and we've seen quite a big increase in spending. But some of the key trends is we see a bigger shift away from cash towards card payments. So cash grew by 15%, but card group payments grew by 21%, and then online shopping grew by 38%. So there's a definite trend from cash to card, but also from bricks and mortar retail to online retail.
Maybe people have just had your queues on a Saturday morning in a shopping centre long enough, Francois.
That's very possible, but I think the online retailers have really opened up the market quite significantly. So and people are becoming a lot more comfortable with that kind of behaviour.
Go on.
Well, I think if we look at the retailers, the ones we would expect, Shoprite is this biggest retailer within the grocery category. But the moment you start looking at the online space, naturally Takealot is one of the top retailers, but it's very closely followed by Shein and Temu, who have really made strong inroads in South Africa. And then what we also see in the online space is a very strong growth trend of online gaming, which I think you see when you look at the advertising and, the sponsorship of sports. And it's really starting to reflect in the numbers as well.
When you talk about online gaming, do you mean gambling? I mean, sometimes it can be hard to differentiate between gambling and gaming.
It is. We look mainly at who is the merchant, where the money is paid, but we don't know exactly what that money is spent on. But if you take, for instance, a brand like Hollywood Bets have seen a significant growth in transactions, and we think that's reflective across the board in the country.
The fact that people are moving more and more online, obviously you need to be more and more aware of that kind of cybercrime. You also need to be aware of new entrants. I mean, everyone knows who Take-A-Lot is. New people coming in, people are a bit nervous about them. I do wonder if in online marketing, how established you are is really going to matter.
I definitely think that makes a big difference. We know, and I think everyone's experienced some kind of an attempt on a scam where someone poses you or presents an offer that is simply too good to be true. And that makes people weary. So it makes them trust the brands that they know well. And I think we've also seen quite a big need for consumer education around money safety and being smart about the way you make purchases or where you send your money. So we've invested significantly in education of our clients. To give you some perspective of that, more than half of our client base are active app clients. So that's about 13 million clients, and we've seen them log into the app just on Black Friday on average twice per person. So that's 27 million logins on that one day. And if that's a barometer of people's activity on the internet and on applications, it shows you what that activity is. And it's important that people then know where to click and where not to go and how to keep their money safe.
Could you tell, so you can tell the merchant, you can't always tell what people are buying. Can you tell if people are moving away more from sort of luxuries and presents to essentials and necessities? I mean, does your data go that deep?
We can unfortunately not see what's inside the basket, but I think if we look at the type of merchants and where people are spending their money, there definitely seem to be a shift towards or a prioritization of essentials. I think it's also how Black Friday has shifted over the years. In the heydays of Black Friday, there were some very deep specials on TVs and air fryers and all kinds of luxuries that made you feel like you had to buy something that you don't really need. And I think we're still very much, even though the economy is looking up, people are still feeling the need to be smart about how they spend their money. And the grocery retailers have really capitalized on that well. And therefore, we see a lot of the spend moving into essentials, groceries, clothing, pharmaceuticals, homeware, but not from what we can see in our data, luxury items.
Someone in my house came home with a 2-for-1 special on toilet paper. Now we can't find where to store the stuff. So, Francois, I can confirm what you're saying. In the past, so if we go back sort of before the online era, the two biggest shopping days in the year, certainly in the shopping malls that I worked in as a teenager, were Christmas Eve and then the Saturday before Christmas. Sometimes they were the same day. I would imagine, and it will be too early to say for 2024, but Black Friday and the Saturday after that must now be competing with those 2 days.
Stephen, it's definitely one of our peak periods, but we actually think that the weekend of the 13th of December may very well beat Black Friday. And then you would see some peaks around Christmas happening as well. So I can't speak to the exact trends now from the previous couple of years around the Christmas period, but we know that the weekend around the 16th of December is always a massive peak. A lot of people are heading back to home or to the Transkei. People are taking leave. People get paid earlier, and we definitely see that coming through in the volumes.
I mean, it's interesting to find out over time whether the festive season spending patterns, whether people are spending more over a longer period of time or just spending it earlier. And, I mean, you won't be able to tell that now either, but certainly with Black Friday and like Christmas, Black Friday seems to be starting earlier, or certainly the advertising around it is, but some people will be tempted to start buying earlier.
I definitely think that is what is happening. I mean, if we just look at the period around Black Friday, it's really extended into the whole weekend, plus Cyber Monday, and some retailers are running promotions for most of November. So it spreads out that spending patterns. As people become more frugal in the way they spend, and I suppose as it becomes easier to be aware of all of the deals and the discounts with online marketing and online commerce platforms, I think people start shopping for the things they need earlier, potentially, and planning for it, rather than waiting until the weekend before Christmas and trying to hit the shopping malls and get everything at once.
Francois Viviers, thanks very much indeed. The Group Executive for Marketing and Communications at Capitec. Well, a question to you: where did you spend your money over the weekend? Have you done your Christmas shopping? Have you still got a lot more to do? 011 883 0702 021 446 0567.
The Money Show.
Business books.
Well, one of the books that I think is probably going to sell quite well over this Christmas, been selling quite well already, tries to explain really where we are and how we got there. The Super Cadres, ANC Misrule in the Age of Deployment. I think you can tell the author's not a big fan. His name is Peter du Toit. He's an assistant editor at News 24, someone I've spent, I don't know, Peter, how many years in the field with? A very long time. Good evening. Welcome to The Money Show.
Good evening, Stephen. Good to talk to you. And yes, many a press conference, many an ANC conference, many late nights standing in queues to get accreditation at Gallagher Estate or somewhere similar.
Indeed. I remember the year Pello Jordan gave us the internet. You start the cover of your book. I was fascinated by who you put on it. So you have Gwede Mantashe, okay. I mean, Tomayani, sure. Malusi Gigaba, obvious. Jacob Zuma, the former president, sure. Thabo Mbeki, Gwede Mantashe. I mean, some people would not have been very pleased to find themselves on the cover of your book.
Well, Stephen, that's the nature of writing books, isn't it? And that's the nature of operating in the space and documenting living history like we do and like we've been doing for the last 20 or so years. Now, Thabo Mbeki was deputy president of the ANC he was a deputy president between 1994, I think, and 99. But cadre deployment, or cadre deployment, as we now know it, was conceptualized and implemented while Thabo Mbeki was president. At the 1997 Mafeking, now Mahikeng, Mafeking Conference, ANC's National Elective Conference, cadre deployment was officially adopted by the ANC as party policy. The establishment of a cadre deployment, National Cadre Deployment Committee, provincial cadre deployment committees, and even local government cadre deployment committees were all established. And incidentally, the first deployment committee was chaired by Jacob Zuma. So it was something that was implemented under the presidency of Nelson Mandela. Under Nelson Mandela's name, the Public Service Act was amended to make it easier for the president to make senior civil service appointments, and Thabo Mbeki was the individual that drove that very hard when he became head of state, certainly in 1999, but definitely when he became leader of the party in 1997, 2 years before Nelson Mandela vacated office.
So for you, there's a direct line between the policy of cadre deployment and the sort of state capture that we all lived through.
I think so, Steve. I think if you look at the evidence, if you look at the voluminous report by the Zondo Commission, the findings, for example, by the Zondo Commission, the role that cadre deployment played over many years, it was certainly, I would argue, and that's the argument that I make in the book, at the root cause of many of the ailments that we face at the moment. Now, in the book, I interviewed a number of people, including Trevor Manuel, who explained to me what the reasoning when all things being equal, what the reasoning for cadre deployment initially was, and Manuel tells a very colourful tale of being a 38-year-old minister of trade and industry in 1994. Moving to Pretoria, taking over a bureaucracy where most of the bureaucrats' surnames were not African surnames, or certainly not related to a coloured man from the Cape Flats, and how difficult it was to start commanding a bureaucracy that up until a couple of years earlier was still still tasked to implement apartheid policies. So the need to change the civil service was definitely there, and Manuel explains it very clearly and in very convincing terms. But Stephen, as I argue in the book, it certainly there was certainly a change in the way that cadre deployment was implemented, and I think certainly after 2004-05, it became a way and a pathway for many organized crime syndicates, for cadres who wanted to enrich themselves, as we saw during the years of state capture, to try and extract as much resources from the public purse as they could.
During the Zondo Commission, I was always amazed at it. And I know I wasn't the only one who was amazed at it, because I could not come up, and I asked plenty of people if they knew of any examples of a country anywhere in the world where a governing party had basically allowed an inquiry into the way in which they had governed, right? I mean, because that's what the Zondo Commission really became, was an inquiry into ANC corruption committed by ANC members. Let me put it in those terms.
Yeah.
And yet, it wasn't just that it continued. It was, broadcast on the public broadcaster day in and day out. It was encouraged, and it was supported by the president, by the leadership of the party, in public at least. And yet, despite that, we still haven't had accountability. I mean, what do you think went wrong there? We all saw the testimony. David Mahlobo, this is always my favorite example for various reasons. He's still a deputy minister, despite the fact that we had testimony of him walking out of the State Security Agency headquarters with money in bags.
Yeah, Stephen, I'm sitting in my study at home, and just behind me, I've got a full-bound set of the Zondo Commission report, and it runs to 2, 4, 6, 7 volumes, and it's almost half a meter high. And when you page through it, and you sat there for many, many hours, it's enormously frustrating to see the extent to which grand corruption, insidious and almost institutionalized corruption, what it did to the civil service and what it did to organs of state and democracy. And to your question, I think we all are enormously frustrated with the state and the state of our law enforcement agencies, the National Prosecuting Authority, the police and the Hawks, SARS and so on and so forth. But that's what state capture did. It absolutely neutered the ability of an emerging democracy, because 20 years after the fall of apartheid and the arrival of democracy, we were still building up these institutions. We were still establishing these institutions as the pillars of democracy, like they should have been. But what state capture did was it absolutely not only destroyed the credibility of many of those institutions, like the National Prosecuting Authority, but it neutered the ability of these institutions to function as the framers of the Constitution wanted, and as the law dictates how it should function. And I think that's what state capture did. Jacob Zuma and everyone around him, what they did very well. And Kwedi Mantashe, Stephen, you mentioned in the beginning, why is he on the front page? Kwedi Mantashe, in 2008-9, was in the front row, was in the very front cohort of ANC leaders who sought to try and protect Jacob Zuma, come what may. You would remember that very famous front page on Mail and Guardian, written by Mandy Rousseau, where Mantashe called judges counter-revolutionary. Now the assault on our judicial system, the assault on the rule of law, we are now picking the bitter fruits of that period. And Mantashe was someone who is distinctly and most definitely partly responsible, for the significant assault on the rule of law. And that's why we don't see someone like David Mahlobo and many others being prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And that's the damage that cater deployment, and I argue, state capture did.
So you have Jacob Zuma on the cover, obviously, former president, our leader from Umkhonto weSizwe. He was elected at Polokwane in 2007, and I remember the rain very well, and the mud. And before that, about 2 weeks before that, maybe it was a few months before that, in a famous interview given to the Financial Mail to Carol Payton, Kgalema Motlanthe, who's not on the front cover of your book, but he gave an interview as Secretary General of the ANC at the time, and he said about projects and the ANC, it's a famous quote, the rot is across the board. So I suppose my question is, if Zuma hadn't won at Polokwane, would state capture have happened in the way that it did happen in the end? And it was deliberate. I mean, Tomoyani's picture is proof of that. But do you think it would have happened without Zuma winning?
Stephen, it's a very good question, and I don't have a clear-cut answer for you. What I can say is I think, and it was a difficult thing to write and a difficult book to research. But the culture of impunity in the ANC started shortly after 1994. There are a number of instances in the first 5 years of democracy where instances of corruption started rearing its head, involving senior leaders of the ANC, and a culture of impunity was established and introduced by the leadership back then. If it wasn't going to be Jacob Zuma, it might have been someone and something else. The arms deal was, I suppose, and many people argue that was the loss of innocence for the ANC. Now, Zuma, we know he will hopefully next year stand trial for offences related to the arms deal. It might have been something different. What I do think is that a culture of impunity was established very quickly, where the interest of the ANC superseded the national interest. I think it was supercharged during the Zuma years, and I think it's very difficult to turn back from that. The election obviously has now changed the political dynamic. Nothing focuses the mind, I think, than losing political power. It would be interesting to see over the next 5 years whether the ANC has the ability to turn things around. I don't think so, but it's a good question. I don't have a clear-cut answer. If it wasn't Zuma, I think it might have been someone else.
The fact that we're now in coalitions, I mean, you would like to think there'll be more checks and balances, more competitors working in government together. That might lead to less corruption. But we've also seen in councils that it doesn't necessarily lead to less corruption. No. I mean, do you have any idea of what's going to happen in national government? Is it going to be harder to have this kind of corruption happening again?
Look, I think in theory it's supposed to be a little bit harder. The ANC isn't this once mighty monolith, Stephen, that you and I spent many years reporting on. It's not that. It's not this all encompassing monolithic entity, that just sweeps away any resistance in its path. Things have changed. There are more eyes and ears in government. You've got different parties who are now running different ministries. You've got probably, when contracts for director generals end soon or in the next couple of years, you'll see different appointments. You'll hopefully see a different work ethic. So I hope, given the fact that the political space is now opened up, that the dynamics have changed, it might be a little bit more difficult. But Stephen, I can also tell you, in my day job at News 24, where I look after our investigative team, what we're seeing there is that the closer that the ANC get to losing political power, the more we see these networks of extraction, the more activity in those networks we see every single day. So I think the closer we get to the ANC completely losing power, I think the more these networks linked to the governing party, linked to organized crime, the more active they will be as well.
Peter du Toit, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate the time. The book is called The Super Cadres. It's ANC Misrule in the Age of Deployment. I think you know Peter's view on things from there. He's also, he wrote the book. He's an assistant editor at News 24. Bringing the time to 7:30.
7:02. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Monday evening time, of course, to find out about someone's money journey, their journey through life, how their life changed as they went through life. And I'm very pleased to welcome, I thought maybe she wasn't going to make it into the studio. I was so pleased when I turned around and there was Tumi Morake, someone who I've followed for a long time. She tells me she misses radio. So, I mean, maybe this will be the beginning of something. Tumi, good evening. Thanks so much for coming in. He says stirring.
No. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. So, I mean, I think the first time I sort of realized who you are, and I imagine you've probably done enough things that people come across you at different times of your career, right?
Yes.
So for some you're this radio, some you're that. But I saw you first, or knew of you first, as someone who stood on a stage and made people laugh.
Yes.
And I've always wondered how on earth you stand up and do that. I mean, I can stand up and talk to people.
Yeah.
But making them laugh, that's something else.
I know, it's insane. I mean, I have bought a car from making people laugh, paid bond, moved countries. I don't know. I guess it's in the magic of getting the people to buy into what you're selling them. And then they want more, you know, and then you can ask for more for giving more. So yeah, that's the journey.
I mean, did you ever think you'd be able to live from being funny?
No, in the beginning, not so much. You know, when I started officially getting paid to do comedy, I was working as a writer. You know, I was writing on Mubango. I was also writing on some sitcom. I was like a new writer. And I was like, okay, I need these two salaries to kind of carry me through. But as I grew, I realized, oh, wait, the zeros increase as you go.
They do.
Depending on where you place yourself. And so, yeah, that's how the funny money started coming in.
So when you were growing up, what kind of community, what kind of family were you growing up in? Where were you?
So I grew up, oh my gosh, it was a little bit tumultuous in a way because until I was 6 years old, I lived with mom and dad. Mom was a nurse, dad was a cop in the bad old days. And I did not know that my dad was an underground, operative situation for the ANC. And so my father got arrested for treason. My mother ran away with me to Tabanchu. And I guess the funny started coming in me escaping. Escapism is where I found my funny. I used to love cartoons. And even before this thing happened, my dad used to, on Sundays, he would put me on his lap and he'd open the Sunday paper and he would read me 2 cartoons. He used to read me Red Eye and Dennis the Menace. And so I also started to learn, kind of get a sense of punchlines and humor that way from my dad. And he's also quite a funny dude, And then when he got arrested for treason, I was now with my mom, who then sent me to my grandmother. And my grandmother was a very talkative, very funny woman. And so was my mother, except my mother was unintentionally funny because she was blunt. I don't think my mother had much of a filter. And I used to find that hilarious. And I think I used to enjoy watching people react to her. And I suppose for me, that's where the humor came from. And I think that's why my humor as well is it can make you very uncomfortable, but you'll still enjoy it because I'm getting you to think. You know what I mean?
I mean, I remember the Dennis the Menace cartoon in the Sunday Times. And it was in the newspaper and then it was in the magazine. And
yes.
What kind of relationship did you have with money at the time? I mean, so it's so interesting. I mean, we had Zwelinzi Mavavi was sitting in the chair you're sitting in now last week. And at the age of 7, he was working on a farm. If a cow went missing, he had to go and find it. We've had people whose first relationship with money is pocket money in high school.
Yes.
Going to the tuck shop. People have very different stories in this country about when they first came across money.
Wow. My relationship with money started on Sundays going to church, getting collection money from my grandmother, and sometimes you're like, maybe a little something for myself. Because,
You stole from...
Never. I shared with the Lord.
So there's a lightning storm above your head right now.
No, because, you'd get the collection money and then you get the ice cream money. And then I think the only time I'd ever really see money was then Sundays and also if there was an event at school.
Yeah.
So I never really had much of a relationship with money, but I can tell you the biggest influence for me in terms of my attitude towards money was watching my mom go through that. Watching my mom do that whole quiet, no one's in the house. While somebody's knocking because they owe the money and they have to pretend we're not home because she can't pay them back. But also just watching her struggle. Financially. And so I think when I grew up as an adult, I was so afraid of credit. I was so afraid of debt. And so I was like, if I can't afford it, I don't want it, I don't need it. And I suppose my relationship with credit only grew with me getting financial education, through being in the industry and realizing you're a freelancer, brah. You don't have every month where you're guaranteed there's an amount coming in. You have really good Christmas months and then you have very quiet months. And so I had to learn to also make money my friend,
So you're going through school. Were you in Joburg? Were you in
this was in Tabanchu. We had one traffic light at the time. In the old town.
Did it work?
It did. It was very exciting. So I grew up in Tabanchu and I would get dropped off at school in the morning and then we'd walk back home after school. And another money thing that would happen every day was I had an aunt who worked at a furniture store in town. So sometimes, especially in summer, we'd walk to the furniture store because we were guaranteed at least R1. That big rand.
Yes.
Yeah, so we'd go there.
Nice big coin.
Hey, that was you knew you had
better than
money.
a R2 note in some ways.
Hey, friend. Okay, I'm not old enough, ladies and gentlemen, to have used the old R2 note. Can Stephen just leave me alone? So we'd get those rands, buy ice cream cone, and continue the rest of the way home. So,
Sure.
yeah.
So you're finishing school, and at some point you became a writer.
Yes.
Somewhere along the line, I mean, when you spoke to people in your family, in your community, I'm going into writing, I'm going to stand on the stage, I'm going to make people laugh. Did any of them go, no, don't do that? I mean,
oh my goodness, me saying I'm going to university was like, yay, I'm going to do arts. Why? It was like, no, what are you? No, anyone can do that. You don't need to go to university for that. I think that was the big discourager for me, where no one took it seriously. So because I'd been accepted into Wits University for fine arts and for dramatic art, and I had to make that choice. And no one was impressed with any of my choices. They're like, you can do this. You don't need school for that. But I wanted it because I felt like I want to explore what the possibilities are in this space. And I'm so glad I did, because I learned business and arts. I did that course. I got to do some directing. I got to learn how to write. But the best part is I got to make connections. So when you go into the industry, I mean, it's not just what you know, it's who you know. And so it was very helpful to, find that projects are being run by people who've either lectured you or studied with you,
And as you get older, it's amazing how powerful those are. I still interview people I was at university with.
Right.
Some of them have forgotten me, thank
Yeah,
goodness.
you build relationships. That's why, I've met people who are like, why are you guys so hung up on this thing? And I'm like, well, I love knowing. I love knowing more about a craft, about what goes into it. It helps me in my choices as well. Knowing the difference between method acting and just jumping in front of a camera, knowing the difference, between a mise en scene and, an establisher, all of that stuff. So, yeah, I don't know. Education is nice. People mustn't underestimate it.
In whatever it is.
In whatever it is.
So you're sort of now writing, you're becoming a comedian. And at the time, I mean, I could count on one finger the number of women who were doing what you were doing.
Bruh.
It was pretty much just you.
Yes.
Were there
my
others?
goodness. Yes, you're right. Because in Cape Town, we had Mel Jones. In Johannesburg, Kensani had been doing it. And then she didn't stay long. Judy Jake still does it. But I think her big gig was on television, making children's TV shows. I think Kim Engelbrecht was dabbling. Because she was the one woman I'd seen on stage. Krije Govender was actually proper doing stand-up comedy and
also dragged away to
Durban.
TV. Yeah,
but also now directing TV. Incredible director, award-winning. And
you must have been. I mean, did you think people would not laugh at you?
Oh no, never. So how I knew I'd be good at stand-up is, again, I was at Wits, and so I started with comedy in a very structured manner. Doing pre-written scripts for people's projects. And so I learned to write for myself. And so when I started doing stand-up, I think the big thing for me was, here's the thing I'm really good at. I'm chubby. I don't speak like the Joburgers. I don't know, they sounded polished.
Yeah.
The other black girls sounded polished. And I just sounded as rural as they come. And so I was like, here's the one space where it doesn't matter how I look, doesn't matter how I sound, it's me. They want me. They call me by my name, not some character name. And so I held on to that for dear life. And I loved the control I had over it. So, yeah, I sat in there, man, because I was enjoying writing. Don't get me wrong. I was really enjoying cutting my teeth and writing. But getting on stage, getting that immediate feedback, and also playing with the boys. I grew up with boys, and here was a space where there's no time for gossip with girls because these are all dudes. If there's a chick there, she's somebody's chick. She's not another comedian. And so I'm also grateful for that experience, because then I wasn't hung up on being a woman. I was just like, I have to be funny, because these guys, as soon as they saw I was good, stopped playing nice with me. It became, we're competition. I was like, okay, so it means I have to punch at your level. And that's what I did.
How did they treat you? I mean, I once spent an hour backstage with a group of comedians. I was the straight person emceeing something, right? One of them was Peter Durkheis, and I laughed so much backstage because this is all the material they couldn't do publicly that I actually couldn't walk on the stage when it was my turn to come on. And they did that because they were trying to out-compete each other. And that's what men do, and I was the outsider, right? Did they treat you in the same way?
It's funny because I'm always like, guys, why are we speaking in punchlines? Like, that's just the vibe backstage. But for me, what I really enjoyed was the protection. You know, at the time, I was working with Darren Mall, I was working with Ronnie Mudimula, Chris Forrest, David Cow, and these people were very protective of me. And so I always say stand-up comedy, you know, there was a time when all these #MeToo things were jumping up and whatever. And I was like, I can honestly say as a woman in the space of stand-up comedy in this country, which is very male-dominated, I felt very safe. The comedians were genuinely protective of me. Obviously, guys will be idiots and go, well, which one can, you know, get her? But because I was one of the boys, it was just one of those things where it's just guys being guys, but I'm in no way being made to feel uncomfortable about that. So they were very aware of when there's boisterous audience members. I knew my guys had me. If I had to get to parking, there was someone to take me to parking. And I mean, in the beginning, I was using taxis. I was taking like 3 taxis to get to Parkers. But they always made sure there was a plan to get me home. And that was really important to me. I mean, if you look at it, even with the Comics Choice Awards and all these comedy awards, you'll see that women, even when the awards are brand new, will be nominated and can even win and have won in certain categories. That's how I think ahead of its time stand-up comedy is. You know what I mean? It's either you're funny or you're not, you're good or you're not. And so I had these big brothers where I even call Chris Forrest the big uncle, because he was also the guy who, when he sees you start making money, he's like, it's really nice to drive a German car, but it's even better to own a property. So you also had those people who were like, what are you doing with your money? You know what I mean? It was a really cool time. I had John Flismus, who literally made me feel like a rock star. To be honest, I think the heart of my comedy was John Flismus. Because there were things I would be afraid to do, and he'd be like, I don't get it. You said you want to say this thing, but you're scared. Just get on stage and freaking say it. And so I'd jump on stage and I'd say these things, and half the audience is shocked. Most of the audience is laughing. Half of them, the other half are going, why are we laughing? Yeah, good vibes.
He is an amazing man.
He's incredible.
We're speaking to Tumi Morake. It's her journey along with money. 10 minutes now to 8 o'clock.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa CIB, a Pan-African bank invested in your story and the potential it can unlock because your story matters. Absa is a registered FSP.
Speaking to Tumi Morake, her life, her journey, her, I suppose, her money and how it matters to her. Tumi, you've done something that some people have done, some people consider doing, but is more common now, which is you spend a bit of time in one country and a bit of time here at home. You spend some time in the States. And when you move, I mean, financially, firstly, it's expensive, right? But you also have to manage a whole new system. I mean, I look at the tax thing and actually just need to go away and have a quiet lie down. I mean, when you go to the States, for example, it's a completely different system.
It is. Like, you get heartburn if you try and do it yourself. So this is what I've learned. Like, you must really love money. Like, a relationship with money must be that lover that you never want to mess up with. And if you ever mess up with, you must know you'll be able to make it right. So I feel like here and in the States, I have tax practitioners because I understood how tax worked here. And I turned tax into a money thing, not a law thing. Then I got to the States with the same mentality, and it was just mind-boggling to me how, this is not accounting. This is tax, bruh. You need to understand the tax law. So that's when I got my tax guy. And in many ways, I'm still trying to work out that system. But yeah, I think if you really love money, you can get professionals to take care of your money. But if you don't know how it works, you're going to still be in trouble. So I'm still learning that system. But I guys, don't judge me, ne? But Trump became my favorite person.
Wow.
Context, money. I'm talking money. Leave everything else out of it. I'm just talking money because, we became residents in 2020. And we arrived there, obviously, with a business already set up, with the kids already going into the schools, etc., because we're green card citizens, right? I mean, residents. And, when you get that tax situation right, and then they tell you, you've got about $20,000 coming your way. You're like, oh, what? You know what I mean? It's like, yeah. So it's been interesting. It was very painful, I won't lie, on the budget the first year because, yes, in your head, you've done all of the exchange rates, etc. But when you live there, you then have to stop doing the math in your head and now start to go, how do I know when I'm spending too much and too little? You know what I mean? When is $5 too much and when is $5 too little? And so I think that was a hard lesson for me because I think my first, I'd say 7 months, because when we were there in the pandemic, during the pandemic, which was 2020, I did very well. That was fire. I was on point. But I think it's because back then, everything was so tight and, you're not living in the world. So your budget doesn't actually get blown like that, right? Then you get into the real world where now you're settling into a city, you're building a home, you're settling kids into school, and you're also building a life. I know my budget saw its bum. It was rough. And so I kind of had to go back to basics,
I mean, it's very hard to do that. And I know people who have, and I've spent, I think, 3 days of my life in Atlanta, so I know nothing about it. But building a life there as a South African black woman in a city that has its own racial history, has the Civil Rights Museum there, I remember. What's that been like? I mean, when you move in society here, move in society then, of course, our society is so distant from itself at times, you can't really compare. But I mean, walking down the street, how does it feel?
Sure. So, firstly, guys, South Africans are incredible human beings because whether you're in New York or Atlanta, there is a WhatsApp group, there's a Facebook group, and they've got you. Whatever you need, advice like this. You've got kids, they've got kids, you've got play dates immediately. Walking the streets, on the other hand, I mean, the politics is so complicated because the African-American people, they also feel like they had to raise that place to the ground and build it right back up for themselves. And then you come as this privileged African with your education and your plan and your fervor and you overtake them or you become competition. But then there are those who are excited by that prospect. They're excited by a sister coming into the fold and bringing in something new. So it's that thing of you have to find your tribe. I was very surprised at the cold reception because I realized when you say you're visiting as an African, the arms are all open wide, you're visiting. But the minute you're like, oh, I've moved here, hey, that's when the room gets divided. You know what I mean? But it's very interesting because the Nigerian community has really been good to me in Atlanta. And a lot of the work when I started getting paid was actually coming from them. You know what I mean? But in terms of what we see on TV, in terms of the relationship with the cops and all of that, man, maybe that's why as Africans they see us as privileged because I haven't really had a bad experience with the cops, to be honest. In fact, I've had them help me a few times. I don't know, like you will hear stories. But when I moved suburbs, because when I arrived, I mean, Lending Pad was a little bit in a semi, what do they call it, transitional neighborhood. And then we moved to a more affluent neighborhood. And I realized something. There are parts of the states that are over-policed.
Yeah.
And the people being policed are the people of color. So I realized when we went to the money that, so this is what's up, And now I have these two black boys, which is my teenage son and my preteen son, who my firstborn is very, very justice obsessed and what's right is right and my voice matters. And I'm like, but we're in America, my friend. This your voice. You must decide when it's heard and when it's silenced. Okay. And so it's a scary thing as a parent. You have to teach your child that, But yeah, that's pretty much it. But it's also been very, again, weird to find these big African-American Trump supporters.
Hey.
It's disturbing, but I'm sorry, like I said, for me, financially shame. I can't fault the guy there. We ate. But it's complicated. I remember just before I left, it was when they were just about to go into elections. And in that neighborhood, you're seeing these big pickup trucks with immigrants must go, and Trump will get rid of the immigrants and all of these wall things. And you reading this stuff as an immigrant yourself and going, yeesh, I forgot where I was. You know what I mean? But I feel like Americans get on with it, man. They get on with it. And in terms of school as well, my firstborn, very smart kid, top performer. And he would get bullied for being African.
Sure.
And so he would come frustrated and talk about just how these intellectual dwarfs are.
It's going to go far.
Are getting to him, and we talk about it, and, I don't know, he handles it with panache. I remember the one time when we were coming here, he grabbed all of his medals, and he's like, well, that kid did tell me to take all to go back home to Africa, so I'm going to take all of these medals and my gold back to Africa. You know what I mean?
Tumi Moraka, it's been great spending some time with you. Nice to see you.
Fantastic. Please tell people to love their money. I know it's December, but remember,
hang on
money
to
is a lover you must be good to.
Tumi Moraka and her journey with money on The Money Show.